Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. I'm Bunsuke and I've been studying Japanese for the past 17 years. If you've been following me on Instagram or through my newsletter, you probably have noticed that I love kanji. And a lot of people have been asking me, how do I study kanji? So in this video, I want to get into how I learn kanji and vocabulary because I think the two are connected, and show you the resources that I use on a daily basis. So let's get to it. So I want to start by addressing the elephant in the room. I have never ever used Anki to study kanji or vocabulary. I've noticed in the limited time that I've spent online in the Japanese learning community that Anki is by far the most preferred platform or method to learn and organize new kanji and new vocabulary. Back in 2005, when I started studying Japanese, Anki wasn't even really a thing. People used to just buy a deck of physical flashcards or they would write their own. But for me, that didn't really make sense. Most of the words that people learned were either from lists or they were completely out of context. I, on the other hand, learn new vocabulary and new kanji through reading. I simply read books, and whenever I find something that I haven't seen before, I tend to write it down, make some notes, and move on. I'm completely okay with forgetting. I think forgetting is just part of the process of learning. And so I don't really beat myself up over it if I forget a word or forget a kanji. If it's important, it'll come up again. For me, reading is its own form of spaced repetition. And this is basically still to this day how I study new words, new vocabulary. I read, I write down, I repeat until things start to stick. So because my learning process is so simple, whenever people ask me how do I learn kanji, I really never have an answer. I just say, I read, I write down what I don't know, and that's it. However, I've kind of tried to break down the process that goes on in my mind whenever I'm learning new words or new kanji, because it's not random. So today I want to get into the categories that I use to organize new words and kanji whenever I encounter them. And those categories are grouping, deconstructing, and contextualizing. So for the rest of this video, I'll explain what I mean by those categories and which resources I use with every step. So let's get started. So the first way by which I learn kanji is by grouping them together in specific ways based on either their differences or their similarities. The first way I group kanji together is by their meaning. For instance, if I see the kanji chichi, I'll look for other kanji that are related to the category of family, like musume, haha, kyōdai. And so in this way, my brain will kind of categorize kanji based on their meaning in a way that really makes sense. Now, I know that most integrated methods like Minna no Nihongo or Genki will probably organize their chapters based on themes. Maybe one is going to the doctor, another might be going to the grocery store. But unfortunately, there are not many kanji workbooks that also organize their kanji thematically. The only one that I know of is this 覚えやすいテーマ別段階別漢字の実践練習. And this is a fantastic workbook that I bought many years ago. It's basically organized by theme such as people, society, culture, and stuff like this. The reason I really like it is because it's very systematic. The radical is indicated in color. You get the two most important compounds, and you get exercises in which you can see how the kanji is used as vocabulary and within a certain context. So I think this is an absolute great method. The problem with this book is that it's very hard to get. Even when it was in print, I know that it was difficult to get your hands on. So if you find it, please get it. Trust me, you won't regret it. Okay, so that's one way of grouping kanji together. Now I want to move on to radicals, or bushu. So bushu are a way of organizing kanji by broader categories of meaning. For instance, if you have this kanji, kin or kane, in kanji as a radical, you're almost certain that that kanji has something to do with gold or metal. And so even if you can't read, let's say, these three kanji, ikari, kusari, and kagi, and you don't know what they mean, you can kind of guess that they have something to do with metal. The thing that they're representing is probably made of metal. And so even if this doesn't tell you the reading of the kanji, at least if in a JLPT you get multiple choice and they use similar kanji with different radicals, and you can see from the sentence that it has to do something with metal, then at least you can give an educated guess as to what it might be. Let's do another example. For instance, this character, ame, which means rain. If you see a kanji with this as a radical, you can be fairly certain that it has to do with some form of precipitation. So these radicals also function as individual kanji. They function by themselves. And so they're fairly easy to recognize. However, there are many radicals that are far less easily recognizable, and for those cases, I use several resources. First, I think the most comprehensive tool that I use is this dictionary, Bushu Tokiakashi Jiten. This is really a great tool if you want to find out where radicals actually come from, what they mean, and what their background is. This dictionary is also organized by theme. So as you can see here, you have the category of dobutsu or animals. So it's really easy to use. The explanations are really clear, and it's just a joy to use. So one other tool that I use is Bushu no Hanashi, part 1 and 2. This is split up into 2 shinsho. And this is written by Atsuji Tetsuji, one of my favorite kanji scholars. And this material is more anecdotal. It's not as comprehensive as the first dictionary that I showed you, but Atsuji Sensei is a master at telling stories about kanji that are just very entertaining. So if you're looking for a kind of fun introduction to Bushu, I think this is a good resource. But if you're looking for a more comprehensive dictionary, I think this might be a better choice. Now, the third way in which I organize and group kanji together is by their ompu, or phonetic marker. Now, phonetic markers are limited to kanji that belong to the category of keisei moji, which is one of the 6 categories of kanji. But fortunately for us, most of the kanji in existence belong to this specific category, so lucky us. So a lot of my students always tell me that they have trouble learning kanji because oftentimes they find that they're very similar to each other, they just look too much the same. But actually, this is something that you can use to your advantage. Take, for instance, these 6 kanji. As you can tell, all of them have a similar element to them, which is the phonetic marker, which is read as ken. Now, the phonetic marker will tell you nothing about the kanji in terms of its meaning. But if you know at least one reading of the kanji, it makes it very easy to look it up in the dictionary. And because all standard kanji dictionaries are basically organized by kunyomi and onyomi, as well as total number of strokes, it's very easy to just pick up any dictionary, for instance, this shinjigen, which I use a lot, or this kanjikai, which I also use a lot for different reasons, and to look up the kanji if you know any of the readings. So creating an awareness of this phonetic marker for me was really an eye-opener, because if I can at least give an estimation of how that kanji is read, I can pick up any standard kanji dictionary and look up the meaning. Now, this shinjigen is very good because of its layout. It's very easy to use. I also really like that the paper is really high quality. You can feel it's a little bit thicker. And also when you open it, you don't have to hold it open. It just folds open and stays on the page. So that's really good. What I also really find useful about this dictionary is the overview in the back of kanji that are very different, but that still have the same kunyomi. It's good to have these together so that you can differentiate between them much more easily, and that also makes it easier to remember, at least for me. Now, the reason I really like this resource, the Kanjikai, is because of this zenyaku. And the zenyaku refers to the complete translation of the Setsumon Kaiji, which is the oldest extant dictionary around on kanji. It's from the 1st century, and it talks a lot about the etymology and the origins of kanji. And of course, it's completely in classical Chinese, and that's why it's so useful to have a modern Japanese translation in this dictionary. So that's the main reason I use this resource. So those are basically the 3 main ways I group kanji together: by meaning, by radical, and by phonetic marker. But I also tend to kind of play around with different ways of grouping things together. Let's say that there are a bunch of verbs that really sound similar but that have nothing to do with each other. For instance, akinau, oginau, yashinau, ushinau. So they all have 4 syllables and they all end in nau, but they have nothing to do with each other. But because they're so similar, it's easy to get them confused when you encounter them in the wild. And so I tend to kind of group these together in an attempt to trick my brain into fusing new connections between words. So I do this for kunyomi, but I also do this for onyomi. So we just talked about phonetic markers, but sometimes the phonetic marker can throw you off a little bit. Sometimes you think a phonetic marker has one reading, but in that specific kanji it has a completely different reading. An example of this is asa, which means morning, and the onyomi of this is cho. So logically you would think that all the kanji that have that phonetic marker in it will also be read as cho. Now in most cases this is true, but there's one exception, this kanji, which is read as byo. And so I like grouping kanji together based on their phonetic marker and then figure out which ones are the odd ones out. Now to my knowledge, there's only one dictionary that really helps with this, and that's the Kanji Onpu Jiten. This is very, very niche, as you can see on the obi. It's specifically made for people who are trying to pass Kanken Ikkyu. If you buy this and think you're getting a standardized kanji dictionary, you will be deceived. So only buy this if you think it's really, really useful. For me, it's really useful because it groups kanji together based on their phonetic marker, but then also gives you an overview of the kanji that have a reading that's different than you would expect based on that phonetic marker. So this is really useful for that, but only for that. Otherwise, don't bother with this. It's pretty useless beyond that. So this was basically step one in my kanji learning process. I group kanji together in different ways in order to trick my brain into forging specific connections between kanji and placing it within various contexts so that it's easier for me to remember down the line. Now, this works really well for learning individual kanji. The next step, deconstructing, is very useful when you learn kanji in a specific context. And of course, the most specific context for individual kanji is vocabulary. And in this case, I kind of want to focus on two character compound words because those are the most prevalent. So take, for example, this list of two character compound words. Now, at first glance, these kanji are very inconspicuous. You might encounter these in any kind of random word list. However, for me personally, it's very difficult to learn words from a list. If I just take these two character compound words at face value and just learn them as a word with a reading, and I try to remember their meaning, then I guarantee you within a few days I'll have forgotten that word. So basically I need to find ways to make that word meaningful to me, or to contextualize the word, or to make it more logical somehow. So one way I do this is by creating an awareness of the relationship between the two kanji that are in the word. Now there are several certain structures that a word can have, and here I want to focus on the 5 most common ones. So let's get back to this list. It seems like any kind of random word list, but actually if you start paying attention to the relationship between the first and the second kanji, you'll see all kinds of different structures emerge. So for example, for the first one, you can see that its antonymic joge is ue to shita, or agaru and sagaru, right? So this is antonymic. For the second example, kande, you can see that the kanji have similar meanings. Samukute tsumetai. So both have some kind of meaning of being cold. For the third one, gyuniku, it's a qualifying relationship because you're asking what kind of niku, what kind of meat is it? It's gyuniku, it's ushi no niku, right? So it's beef. So this is a qualifying relation. In the case of the fourth, tozan, mountain climbing, it's a relationship of a noun and an action. So yama o noboru. In the case of the fifth, fukutsu, stomach ache, it's a subject-predicate relationship. So onaka ga itai. And so if you kind of break them down into the structures or the relationships between the kanji, now it makes much more sense as a word. And that brings me to my second point in this category, which is breaking down kanji or compound words into their kunyomi. So I kind of did that in the previous example, but let's say you have a word like shiken, exam. Most people will know that the first kanji is read as tamesu, to test, but not many people will know that the second kanji is also read as tamesu. So it's tamesu, tamesu. And so these are, as you saw in the case with kande, in a synonymic relationship. Both mean tamesu, and so together they form the noun exam. Another example might be the word shorai, a very basic word that means future. However, if you break the word down into its respective kunyomi, masani koyoto suru, that which is about to arrive, then the word starts to make a lot more sense. It's not just another word with a sound to which you attribute a meaning, but if you break it down into its kunyomi, it makes much more sense as a 2-character compound word. So when I deconstruct compound words, I basically try to find out what the relationship is between the first and the second kanji, and then break it down into their respective kunyo. That way it will make much more sense to my brain. and it will be much easier to memorize the word long term. So that brings me to my third and final category, which is contextualizing. So contextualizing for me basically means reading. I like to read a lot of books, and I get a lot of my new vocabulary in kanji just by reading, and I memorize the new words and the new kanji in the ways I just explained to you. Now in my case, because I'm doing a PhD in Japanese literature, I mostly use literary works. And if you're already kind of familiar with reading Japanese literature in the original, you can maybe use resources like青空文庫. Now,青空文庫is basically a large database of all the copyright-free literature. So you can just go on there and use the literature in ways that you see fit. Make Anki decks from it if that's what you want. But it's a very good resource. So maybe one drawback of青空文庫is that because the copyright has become expired, the literature you'll find there is also a little bit on the older side and maybe difficult to understand if you're just getting into Japanese literature. However, I have you covered because a few years ago I created a free resource called Bunsuke's newsletter over on Substack. I'll list a link in the description below, in which I basically sent out a short passage from a literary work, including a vocabulary list and a short translation. So this is a great way to get into Japanese literature if you're not used to it yet, and to kind of navigate your way around and to find out what you like and what you don't like. It's completely free, as I said, so head on over to my Substack if you're interested. Now, another great online resource that I use to find out how words are used in a specific context is the Hinoki Project website, especially their Natsume page. On this website, you can kind of enter a noun or a verb or an adjective, and then basically the website will give you the most common examples in which that word is used. So for instance, if you search for hanzai and you want to know how the word hanzai is used as an object, you can see the most common way it's used is hanzai o okasu. If you want to see how it functions as a subject, you can see the most frequent combination is hanzai ga hassei suru. If you want to get in more writing practice with Japanese, or you just want to know how words are used in a specific context and in combinations with which other kinds of words, then this is a great resource. So those are basically the three categories by which I learn and organize new kanji and new vocabulary. Now, of course, I realize that what works for me doesn't necessarily work for you. This is just how I learn, but that's based on my own process and my own study goals. Maybe you have different learning goals, and of course that will encourage you to use different kinds of resources than I do. But I just wanted to share my own learning process because I hope it's also useful for you. Now, to end this video, I wanted to introduce some of the other resources that I use to study kanji. As I said, I do Japanese literature, mostly Meiji and Taisho and early Showa stuff. And the kanji dictionaries that I introduced to you earlier are very, very good, but they're always based in Chinese classical literature. And so if you're doing very specific Japanese literature from a specific era, then sometimes you won't find the words that you need. In that case, I use a different dictionary, and that is, it's heavy. This Shincho Nihongo Kanji Jiten. And this has a lot of example sentences that come from the exact works that I am reading. So that's very, very useful. And you can also see that some of the entries in this kanji dictionary are not all onyomi based classical Chinese readings. Sometimes you'll have Japanese words with the specific kanji of that entry. And so that's very, very useful for somebody like me. Again, this is quite an expensive resource. It costs almost $100. So if you want to buy this because it looks nice on the bookshelf, a sentiment that I completely understand, then by all means go for it, but it's quite a specific tool. But I use it a lot. I also enjoy using kanji kente materials. I especially like their yojijukugo jiten. This is quite comprehensive. It also gives you the shutten, or origin of where the yojijukugo comes from. So that's also nice to have there as a reference. So this is something that I use almost on a daily basis. One other type of resource I really like to use when I want to get into the more obscure world of kanji is anthologies of classical Chinese poetry annotated in Japanese. Japan has a very long-standing tradition of annotating classical Chinese poetry. So these are really, really solid anthologies, often annotated by top specialists in their field. And if you don't want to go to the dictionary every time you see a difficult kanji, this is really helpful because, as you can see, it has a so-called goshaku, or a word list with all the meanings of the words that are difficult, and that will really help you understand the poem. But this is also a way to really get into very, very obscure kanji that you would normally never use, or to see kanji in a very different context. You'll find kanji that are used on a daily basis still in modern Japanese, but that means something completely different in a classical Chinese poem. So this is always really cool. I really like getting into this. This is pretty good. The Chugoku Meishi Kanshou Jiten. So that's it. That's how I study and learn and organize new kanji and new vocabulary. So for me, it's not at all about learning the most amount of words in the least amount of time, but it's more about putting in place the systems that will make it easier for me to learn, organize, and recognize all of those words in kanji down the line when they're used in a specific context. Of course, as I said, this is just how I learn, but I hope you really enjoyed this video. Please let me know if you have a different way of going about learning kanji and vocabulary down in the comment section. Don't forget to like and subscribe because that really helps me push out my content. And I hope to see you in the next one. Bye bye.